Never go to the farm. That was the only rule my husband insisted on during our 24 years of marriage. My name is Catherine Mitchell. I'm 55, and I'm a widow who has just lost her partner, Edward. But when he died, the key and the letter on the lawyer's desk forced me to break that rule. I never expected that place to be merely a piece of land. It was a secret he had buried for his whole life. The little church on the outskirts of Minneapolis felt colder than usual that day. Patches of thin ice still clung to the path in March, and the smell of furniture polish mixed with lilies made my head spin. I remember sitting up straight through the service, my hands folded over the handkerchief on my lap, trying to keep the calm composure Edward used to praise as serenity. Inside, though, I felt like a small boat blown out from shore with no idea where it was headed. People came up to take my hand, offer a brief hug, and repeat the same consoling phrases. He was a good man. You two were so happy. Time will heal. It wasn't until the choir rose for the final hymn that I realized with a jolt that in 24 years of marriage, he had asked for almost nothing, except for one prohibition. I'd grown used to Edward's steadiness, his thoughtfulness, the way an engineer chose the solution that caused the least disruption, even in the rare arguments. Yet whenever the farm was mentioned, he shut that door of memory tight. Don't bring it up. Don't go there. His death hit like a sudden drop. No warning. One ordinary afternoon, he set down his coffee, said he felt a little tired and slumped over. I had once taught my students to analyze a passage, to look for clues in the details left hanging, but life does not leave semicolons for us to follow. In the nights that followed, my kitchen felt unfamiliar. His deep blue ceramic mug sat quietly on the shelf, next to a sugar jar lid that had been turned a notch. Edward always left it like that. I stared at that tilted ring until dawn, my heart empty as an unfinished sentence. 2 weeks after the funeral, I went to his lawyer's office, Mr. Winters, right on time. The room was oak-paneled, bathed in warm light. The scent of fresh paper and leather binders made me feel as if I were stepping into an old library. Mr. Winters was about my age, wore thin-rimmed glasses, and had a calm, low voice, the kind trained to deliver bad news politely. He began by listing insurance policies, the will, and familiar words like settlements, transfers, and powers of attorney. The rustle of practicalities creeping in, giving shape to the vague ache of grief. There's one more thing, Mrs. Mitchell. He pushed a small, heavy black velvet box across to me. I opened it and found a shiny brass key, long and slender, with an oval metal tag engraved Riverside Valley Farm. Beneath it sat a white envelope in Edward's neat, familiar handwriting. Cat. I heard my own voice ask, but it sounded like someone else. What is Riverside Valley Farm? Mr. Winters handed me a file. A property in Vermont. Edward bought it 3 years ago and has settled all the taxes. The papers have been transferred to your name, effective today. Vermont. The name dropped into the room like a stone thrown into a pond. Ripples spread and touch small, stray memories. The smell of pine on his coat whenever he said he was traveling out east. A pressed maple leaf tucked silently into my book by him. A few late emails that ended with, "The mountain roads are tricky in the snow." I had dismissed all of it as a harmless coincidence. I picked up the envelope. The paper rustled, a familiar sound that made my chest tighten. Before I opened it, I looked at Mr. Winters. Did he leave me any instructions? He nodded, turning to a note clipped in the file. Edward wanted you to be informed about this property after the funeral. And he paused, careful as if he feared breaking something fragile. He wanted you to see the place once. My fingers trembled as I opened the envelope. Edward's handwriting appeared. Letters I had read 1,000 times in the little notes he stuck on the fridge or on the door. Cat, he'd written, "I built this place for you. Go there and you'll understand." That was all. No explanation, no excuse, not a single why. There's a kind of silence that speaks, seeming to lack words but full of meaning. I folded the letter back into the envelope and slipped it beside the key. Absent-mindedly, I touched the cold edge of the metal. The chill seeped into my skin and sank to a depth where everything was unsettled. I thought of the nights when Edward had said, "Don't go to the farm," in a voice that allowed no argument, not angry but fearful. Fear of whom? Fear of what? The past? Other people? Had I complied out of love, out of respect, because I believed happiness could last if you didn't pry open certain dark cupboards? But this letter was another kind of key. It not only opened the gate to a farm in Vermont, but also opened a door inside me. If he had built that place for me, if all those business trips led him there, how had we lived the last 24 years? Had I only known his sunny side while avoiding the shadowed woods? And if looking away is a form of loving, when does it become an act of running away? Mr. Winters had me sign a few more papers. The fountain pen glided, and my name appeared more times than usual. For the first time, I felt I was more than someone signing grocery bills. I left with the velvet box, the envelope, the file, and that bittersweet, incomplete sensation. A taste I could not name, regret steeped in suspicion, and at the bottom, strangely, a thin thread of hope. On the drive home, I stopped at the supermarket and bought a few things without remembering what I'd put in the cart. At home, I dumped them on the kitchen counter like plastic game pieces. The kitchen was quiet. I made tea, opened the envelope again, and read the single line slowly, as if I were one of my students parsing a poem. Go there, and you'll understand. That evening, I sat in the armchair with the faded wedding album on my lap. I looked at the 28-year-old face beside Edward's, the two of us under an arch of trees, sunlight slanting through hair. Back then, I believed in promises. We mostly do. Not because they're spoken, but because they are lived every day. Edward had lived the promise of peace with me so well that I assumed he would never change. But perhaps he had changed quietly on the day he bought a plot of land in Vermont and began a path of his own, not a path that left me, but a path that returned him to something he had been running from. That night, I opened the coat closet. The scent of pine lingered on one of his heavy jackets, only faintly, like a memory. I pressed my cheek to the cool fabric and felt my heartbeat stagger, as if learning to breathe again after a misstep. On the dining table, the velvet box glinted. Without saying it aloud, I knew I would go. The next morning, I called Grace. She answered with an attempt at calm that cracked at the start of her voice. I told her about the meeting with the lawyer, as well as Vermont and Riverside Valley Farm. Grace was silent for a moment. "Are you going, Mom?" she asked. I said, "I have to." Not out of curiosity, and not for money, but because if I never set foot there, my marriage would remain a beautiful painting, missing a swath of sky, never whole, no matter where you hung it. I folded the letter into my wallet and put the key into my coat pocket. The metal clicked against my hip like a tangible truth, weighty, definite, undeniable. I took the old road map from the drawer and circled Vermont the way you circle a question that needs an answer. Riverside Valley Farm, I read aloud, practicing a name that would follow me for a long time. And somewhere at the edge of my sight, Edward stood and offered that familiar half smile. He no longer said, "Don't go." He didn't say go. He left one short line, enough for me to decide the rest. Go there and you'll understand. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the warm dark for a moment. Out beyond, the maples of Vermont were shedding winter and preparing to turn red. I thought, some truths only reveal themselves in a different light, the light of place, memory, or a late courage. And at last I was ready to open the door. I set out on a weekend morning when Minnesota's sunlight had not yet pierced the gray clouds. After placing a small suitcase in the back seat, I took a long breath, settled into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The car trembled gently. The motor hummed evenly like a heartbeat that soothed me. I had traveled far with Edward many times, but never had a trip felt so heavy. A journey without him sitting beside me, steering and softly humming along with the radio. The highway stretched ahead. I let the mile markers fall behind, my heart weighed down by a muddled ache that I could not name. Now and then, the rear-view mirror reflected rows of small houses, which slowly gave way to empty fields. Wind slipped through a crack in the window, bringing with it the scent of dry grass and damp earth. A smell both strange and familiar, as if reminding me that I was leaving one world to enter another, the territory Edward had always kept secret. The farther east I drove, the more the landscape changed. Rolling hills appeared, dark green like endless ribbons of waves. I passed small towns, each with a single main street lined with a diner, a woodworking shop, and a steepled church. People walked slowly and waved when I stopped for gas. Everything was so peaceful that I found myself wondering, why had such a gentle place become a ghost in Edward's memory? When I reached Vermont, autumn exploded around me. Maples stretched along the road as far as the eye could see, their leaves blazing red like tiny dancing flames. Sunlight filtered through the leaves at times, breaking into warm, golden shards that spilled across the windshield. I slowed down, letting myself be swallowed by that sea of color. In my mind, I remembered one evening when Edward had seen a Vermont landscape painting at an art exhibit. He'd been quiet for a long time and then changed the subject. I hadn't paid much attention then. Now everything began to fall into place. Details I had once dismissed as trivial suddenly became landmarks. The road narrowed, winding across hills and over wooden bridges that arched above streams. Each bend revealed a new scene: broad meadows, a sparkling lake, or a small log house with blue smoke curling from its chimney. I felt as though I were turning pages in one of Edward's old books, the books he used to read alone, hidden from me. Each page raised a new question. What had he seen? What had he remembered? What had pained him on this land? After hours of driving, the GPS announced that there were 5 miles to go. My heart raced and my hands gripped the wheel. The final road into the valley was eerily quiet, flanked by tall red maples that rose like a natural wall. The tires crunched over a carpet of dry leaves with a rustling sound. Everything seemed to fall silent, leaving only the engine and my breathing. Then the gate appeared. A large iron gate, 2 moss-covered stone pillars, and an arch where old-fashioned capital letters were embossed: Riverside Valley Farm. Late afternoon light struck the black iron, causing the letters to gleam with an antique copper hue, stately and mysterious. I braked and sat motionless, looking at that gate as if at a waking memory. This was the place Edward had forbidden me to set foot on. This was also the place he had secretly built for me. The house came into view beyond the trees, half hidden by tall maples. A large white house with a gray tiled roof, wide porches, and tall window panes that reflected the evening sky. Classic architecture, cared for down to every detail. I noticed flower pots on the steps, freshly painted railings, and a glossy red wooden door. It was not a dilapidated farmstead, but a stately, elegant manor, full of life. I cut the engine and sat for a moment, feeling my chest tighten and then loosen. Overwhelmed by its beauty, I still felt a vague unease. What else had Edward left behind here, besides a surprise? Had his earlier prohibitions been meant to protect me or to hide me? I stepped out of the car. Vermont air rushed in, carrying the scent of burning red leaves and pine. Dry leaves crackled beneath my feet. The gate before me stood silent, waiting for my hand. I drew the key from my coat pocket. The metal glinted in the last light of day. I took a deep breath. Then, with all the eagerness and anxiety inside me, I inserted the key into the lock. A click rang through the valley. The Riverside Valley farm gate slowly swung open, as if unveiling a door into the remainder of my life. I stood on the porch for a long while before daring to turn the doorknob. The key Edward had left fit perfectly, twisting once before the lock gave way. The heavy wooden door creaked softly, and I stepped inside. The scent of freshly varnished pine mixed with the faint fragrance of dried flowers enveloped me at once. Sunlight poured through tall window panes, streaming down across polished wooden floors, and then I stopped breathing. Before me stretched an entire world I never thought Edward belonged to, a world of horses. Paintings covered the walls, galloping horses across meadows, wild stallions rearing beneath stormy skies, mares shielding their foals, bronze, wooden, and even finely crafted porcelain statues lined the shelves, tables, and mantel. Black and white photographs captured different breeds, their intelligent, untamed eyes staring at me as though alive. I staggered a few steps, my heart tightening. For 24 years of marriage, I had believed Edward only humored my passion when I lingered in front of horse paintings at exhibitions or dreamed aloud of one day having a pasture of my own. He had never refused, but he had never shown much interest either. Yet here, an entire house had been transformed into a shrine to that passion. Not his passion, mine. I reached out to touch a bronze statue on an oak table, a horse rearing, its finely sculpted eyes catching the afternoon light as though flashing. A swell of emotion rose in my chest, choking me. How deeply Edward had understood me, and how completely he had hidden it. On a large desk near the window, standing out among the countless details, was a silver laptop. Its lid was closed, but on top of it lay a single fresh red rose, as though someone had placed it there moments before I arrived. My hands trembled as I picked up the flower. Its sweet scent brought tears rushing to my eyes. When I opened the laptop, the screen glowed to life. The words appeared. Enter password. I hesitated for a few seconds, then remembered the line from Edward's letter. The day we met with your last name. My heart pounded as I typed the familiar combination of numbers and letters. The screen went black, then a video window appeared. Edward's face filled the frame. Not the pale, weary face I remembered from his final days, but Edward as he had once been. Strong, alive, his eyes bright, his familiar half-smile tilted to one side. I reached toward the screen, feeling as if he were sitting across from me. Hello, Kat. His voice rang warm and deep, so familiar that it clenched my heart. If you're watching this, then I'm no longer by your side. I'm sorry for leaving you alone. I bit my lip, my hands shaking. Edward paused, his gaze softening. There's a truth I need to tell you, one I kept hidden. 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with a hereditary heart condition. The doctors told me I had only a few years left. I chose not to tell you or Grace because I didn't want our last years to be filled with worry and fear. I wanted us to live normally, to laugh, to love, without the shadow of illness looming over us. I broke down sobbing, tears splashing onto the keyboard. He went on. I know you'll be angry. I know you'll feel betrayed. But please believe, it was only because I wanted you and our daughter to have peaceful years. And during those years, I poured everything I had into building Riverside Valley Farm, a place I hoped would give you peace once I was gone. I covered my face, my sobs catching in my chest. Love and betrayal twisted tightly together inside me. He had loved me enough to build an entire world where I could find my dream. But he had also hidden it all, carried the burden alone, and taken from me the chance to hold his hand through his final days. On the screen, Edward smiled. That smile I both loved and hated with every fiber of me. I hope you can forgive me, and I hope you'll be here to feel all the love I couldn't put into words. The video ended. The screen went dark, leaving only my trembling reflection staring back. I sat frozen, clutching the red rose tightly in my hand. In that room filled with horses, I felt as though I had been given a priceless gift, and at the same time, carved with a wound no comfort could ever heal. I was sitting motionless in front of the laptop, the red rose pressed tightly in my palm, when the sound came. The crunch of tires on gravel. My heart clenched. The noise grew clearer, slower, until it stopped right outside the gate. I shot to my feet and hurried to the tall window overlooking the drive. A black SUV sat neatly parked. 2 women stepped out. Both carried something at once familiar and foreign. Tall, lean frames, sharp-angled faces, chestnut-colored eyes. I recognized them instantly. Rebecca and Lydia, Edward's younger sisters. I had only ever heard their names in passing, in Edward's rare, halting stories. But he had never allowed them into our daily lives, never permitted a reunion. Rebecca, the elder, wore a beige long coat and walked with confident poise. Beside her, Lydia, a few years younger, with flowing red hair, smiled brightly, but her eyes were cold as glass. They looked around the estate with a blend of curiosity and ownership, as though Riverside Valley Farm had always been theirs. I hesitated, then opened the front door. Rebecca gave me a thin smile. "Catherine, isn't it? We truly mourn our brother. We should have met under different circumstances." Her words of condolence sounded proper, yet hollow. Lydia's gaze darted quickly inside the house, her eyes flashing with hunger. "It's unbelievable. Edward kept this purchase a secret. This was our ancestral property, you know." The words chilled me. In an instant, every trace of sympathy evaporated, revealing their true purpose. I swallowed hard. Edward left everything to me. Rebecca gave a soft laugh, as if I had spoken something naive. "He was weak in his final years. You know that. It isn't fair that the family's property should belong to an outsider." An outsider. I, the wife who had shared his life for 24 years, was now branded with those 2 words. A shiver ran down my spine. Images of Edward's evasions, the silences whenever Vermont came up, replayed in my mind. "My family isn't simple, Cat," he had once sighed. "Now I understand." In my panic, I turned back to the laptop. The screen lit up and another video began to play automatically. Edward appeared again, his eyes more solemn this time. "If you're watching this, it means they've arrived. Rebecca, Lydia, they're not here for you, Cat. They're here for oil." I froze. He continued, his voice deliberate. "This land isn't just childhood memories or a gift for you. This land holds great potential. Resort developers are eager to buy and build here. They know that, and they won't stop just because you're my wife." I glanced back at the 2 women standing in the living room, their eyes sweeping across every detail as if taking inventory. For a brief moment, I felt utterly besieged, alone in the house Edward had left me, at once a gift and a battlefield. Rebecca spoke again, her voice steady, resolute. "We'll soon discuss division. Trust me, you don't want to stand against this family." I stood there trembling, Edward's voice echoing in my memory, while his sister's eyes cut at me like blades. The veil of secrecy had been torn away, and the true confrontation had begun. I had thought I would be alone in this vast house until I heard the faint tapping at the porch. I opened the door, and before me stood a man well into his 70s, lean but steady, silver hair spilling from beneath an old felt hat. His eyes were bright and kind, but behind them lingered a depth of knowledge that startled me. "You must be Catherine?" His voice was low, rough, yet firm. I nodded slightly. "My name is Ellis. I've been the caretaker of this farm, and I am also the one Edward entrusted before he left." I froze. my throat tight. Edward had never once mentioned his name. Ellis gave a sad smile, as though he could see all the shock in my eyes. He nodded, then said, "He left you more than you think. If you have the courage, please follow me." We walked around to the back of the farm. The air was crisp, carrying the smell of dry leaves and rotting wood. An old barn loomed ahead, a wooden structure that might have stood for a century. When the door opened, the scent of hay and dust rushed out, making me sneeze. Inside were piles of straw, rusted farm tools, and dented metal barrels. I frowned, wondering why Edward had clung to such a shabby place. Ellis strode to a far corner and swept aside a thick layer of straw with his boot. Large patches fell away, revealing a floorboard of a different color. He bent, heaved it up, the hinges screeching. Beneath was a heavy iron hatch, engraved with tiny characters I couldn't read in time. "Edward wanted you to see this," Ellis said, turning the lock with an old key. The hatch opened, a rush of cold air hitting my face. Metal steps led deep down, lit by the dim glow of fluorescent lamps. I swallowed hard, my heart racing, but followed Ellis. The chamber wasn't large, but it was meticulously arranged. Tall wooden shelves lined the walls, filled with neatly stacked files. Maps covered the plaster, huge sheets charting Riverside Valley and beyond. At the center stood a walnut desk, cluttered with a small projector, thick stacks of reports, and another laptop. Black, older than the one I had seen upstairs. I was stunned. Edward, the man I had always thought lived simply, quietly, had prepared a room like this, calculated and strategic. Ellis pulled open a drawer and handed me a thick file. "He wanted you to know this land holds more than sentimental value. These are all the market reports he secretly gathered." My hands trembled as I flipped through page after page. Charts, figures, forecasts, all pointing to one reality. The value of Riverside Valley's land was skyrocketing. A major real estate corporation had already set its sights here, planning a luxury resort. The purchase offers, zoning maps, and development notes were all carefully annotated. My palms went cold. So this was what Rebecca and Lydia were after? Not memories, not home, but millions in profit. Ellis spoke slowly, his voice heavy. Mr. Edward knew that when he passed, his sisters would come. To them, this land is only merchandise, but to him, it was his love left for you. I staggered into a chair beside the desk. Suddenly, the dark laptop blinked on and a video started to play. Edward's face appeared again. This time he looked more solemn, his eyes deep as though seeing straight through me. "Kat," his voice came, warm but firm. "If you're here, it means they've arrived. Rebecca and Lydia won't stop. To you, Riverside Valley is a home. To them, it's money. I couldn't let them take what I built for you. I've prepared everything you'll need, the documents, the evidence, even potential allies who will stand with you. Use them. You'll know what to do." The image froze, then disappeared. The screen went black, reflecting my tear-streaked face. I sat in silence for a long time. 1,000 questions tore through me. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you keep it hidden until you were in the ground? Yet at the same time, something fierce began to stir in my chest. Edward had not only left a legacy of love, he had left me a battle, and he believed I was strong enough to fight it. Through sobs, I whispered, "You always trusted me more than I trusted myself." Ellis laid a hand firmly on my shoulder, steady as stone. "Mrs. Mitchell, he knew you would need this strength. And he knew you would not give up." I lifted my gaze to the walls covered in maps, the shelves weighed down with files, the evidence of Rebecca and Lydia's schemes. Part of me still shook with fear. I was just a widow, used to quiet routines, never one to stand against anyone. But another part, deeper within, began to burn. If I didn't defend this place, then all Edward's labor, all his love, would turn to ashes in someone else's hands. I wiped my tears and stood. Mr. Ellis, we'll fight. I don't know how yet, but I won't let them take Riverside Valley. In that moment, I knew. Grief was no longer only a burden, it had become strength. Edward had planted the seed in me, and here, in this cold underground chamber, it began to grow. When we climbed back up and sealed the hatch, I looked across the meadow stretching outside. The sunset painted the horizon red, with gold light spilling over the rustling rows of maple trees. I knew then, the real battle had only just begun. That afternoon, my phone rang. The screen showed my daughter's name, Grace. I hurried to answer, my heart hoping to hear her familiar, warm voice. Instead, I heard a tone that was distant and shaky, as if someone had breathed doubts into it. Mom, Aunt Rebecca told me. I have a right to the land in Vermont, too. Why did you hide it from me? Why didn't you tell me everything from the start? I was stunned. Her words cut like a knife. I remembered the first day I'd received the key from the lawyer and called Grace to tell her that her father had left a farm in Riverside Valley. She'd only murmured, thinking it was an ordinary inheritance matter. But now, through Rebecca's mouth, everything had been turned into secrecy, into conspiracy. Grace, I didn't hide it from you. I told you, I stammered, but Grace interrupted. No, you never told me Dad had disputes with the family, never told me about Vermont's past. I had to hear it from someone else. I feel like a child. My mom always makes decisions for me. I have a right to know. Her voice was a mix of anger and choked emotion. I wanted to explain, but my throat tightened. Tears welled up. I had just lost Edward, and now I faced the risk of losing my only child's trust, too. Grace, listen to me, I pleaded. I don't want to listen. You always think you're right, but you don't understand. I don't want to be treated like an outsider. The line went dead. I sank into a chair, and the phone slipped from my hand. In that moment, the grand house around me suddenly felt unbearably cold. That night, I couldn't sleep. Images kept flashing through my mind. Edward brushing off my questions about his Vermont family. Little Grace holding a notebook to ask me math problems when she was small. Family dinners filled with laughter. I wondered if I had been wrong. Had I grown so used to keeping silence that now that silence had become the rope Rebecca used to bind my daughter? I remembered Edward's words in the basement video. They will not stop. To you, Riverside is home. To them, it's money. But he hadn't said they would try to draw Grace in. I felt both weak and furious. 2 days later, I flew to New York. The trip felt endless. I sat with my knees pulled up in my seat, my heart racing, terrified that Grace would refuse to see me. But I knew that if I didn't face her, I might lose her forever. Grace's small apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old building. The door opened and my daughter appeared. Eyes red, hair hastily tied back, face both tired and resolute. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't wait. I stepped forward and hugged her tightly. At first she froze, but then my shaking breath calmed her. I felt hot tears fall on my shoulder. "Grace," I whispered, "I didn't hide things from you out of selfishness. I only didn't want you to be hurt by messy affairs. But your father, he left you a message. You need to hear it from him." I opened the laptop and clicked into the folder Edward had left. The screen lit up and his face appeared, vivid as if he had never left. "Grace, my daughter," his voice said, low and warm. "If you're watching this, it means I'm gone. I know Rebecca and Lydia will come to you. They will speak of rights, of money, of shiny things that blind people." Grace held her breath, eyes wide, her hand gripping mine. "But I want you to know the truth. That land once belonged to my family, but my siblings only saw its sellable value. I bought it back not to divide it, but to keep it as a home for your mother and you. I wanted you to have a place to come back to, a place that truly belongs to you. Don't let them drive a wedge between you and your mother, Grace. You are the reason I did all of this." Edward's image paused, then the screen dimmed. Grace broke down, sobbing like a child. She collapsed into my arms, trembling. "I doubted you. I believed them. I was so stupid." I stroked her hair and whispered, "No, Grace. You were swept up. Your father knew that, which is why he left this video. He believed we would get through it together." She looked up, eyes still red, but with a steady light returning. "I won't let anyone take what Dad left." "I'll stand with you, Mom." I held her tightly. In that tiny apartment, amid the city's cacophony, I knew I had regained what mattered most. That night, Grace slept in her bed while I lay on the narrow sofa. I watched her, her cheeks flushed in sleep, her lashes fluttering, and felt my heart lighten. Rebecca and Lydia could continue scheming, but we had found each other again. I whispered in the dark, "Do you see, Edward? I kept our child, and we will keep Riverside together." Chapter 7. The Battle in the Living Room. The living room of Riverside Valley Farm blazed with light. I had prepared for this meeting for days. White linen curtains were neatly drawn back, the oak table polished to a shine, the leather armchairs arranged in a semicircle. The scent of fresh wood mingled with the tea I had just brewed, an attempt to create warmth. But I knew there would be nothing warm about today. The sound of a car stopping at the gate echoed outside. Moments later, the door opened, and in walked Rebecca and Lydia, followed by a man in a gray suit, their lawyer. Rebecca led the way, eyes proud, lips curved into a thin half-smile. Lydia glanced around distractedly, as if she had long imagined herself mistress of this room. The lawyer opened his case, laid a thick file on the table, and gave me a perfunctory nod. "Catherine," Rebecca began, her tone silky yet sharp, "we regret that we have to talk about money in such circumstances. However, you know, ancestral land cannot be left in the hands of just one person. A resort will bring in millions of dollars. Do you really think you can resist that?" I drew a deep breath. My heart was pounding, yet my voice emerged calmer than I expected. "Rebecca, Lydia, I've heard enough. You see Riverside as merchandise, but for me, this is the home Edward left behind." Rebecca let out a mocking laugh. "A home? Can a home feed you and Grace? You don't have the money to maintain a property this size. We have investors and a plan. You just need to sign and we'll all be rich." I met their eyes squarely. Rich by selling memories? By betraying love? "Number, I won't sign anything." Their lawyer stepped in, voice even but cold. "Mrs. Mitchell, I have here legal documents proving that this land originally belonged to the Mitchell family. Rebecca and Lydia, as heirs, are fully within their rights to demand division." My lips pressed tight. This was the moment Edward had prepared me for. I rose, walked to the wooden cabinet against the wall, and pulled out the thick file from the hidden basement. My heart raced, but my hand was steady as I placed it on the table. "Here," I said clearly, "are the documents proving Edward purchased Riverside Valley outright from its previous owner with his own money. Every procedure was completed legally. There are no remaining ties to the Mitchell family. And here," I opened another file, "is evidence of the debts Rebecca and Lydia once created. Debts Edward repeatedly covered to protect the family's reputation. If necessary, I can make this public." The room fell heavy. Rebecca's face paled, Lydia's jaw clenched, and their lawyer frowned, lowering his voice as he whispered something to them. I didn't stop. I gestured, and into the room stepped a middle-aged man with a calm smile. The representative of Western Plains. He shook my hand, then sat opposite Rebecca and Lydia. "I was invited by Mrs. Mitchell," he said firmly. "Our company has no interest in building a luxury resort." We're here to work with her to preserve Riverside Valley as a cultural and ecological retreat, maintaining its heritage and landscape. This is sustainable development, not a sell-off. Rebecca and Lydia froze. I could see their careful calculations crumble. I lifted my head high, my voice strong and unwavering. You thought I was just a weak widow, easy to corner? You were wrong. This is my husband's legacy. I won't let it fall into the hands of those who care only for money. If I must, I'll turn this place into a sanctuary so that anyone who sets foot in Riverside Valley will know love can leave behind a home, not a piece of land to be traded. Grace's hand squeezed mine. My daughter stood tall, eyes shining. She faced her aunts, her voice trembling yet clear. My father wasn't crazy, and my mother isn't alone. Silence fell over the room. Rebecca's lips parted, but no words came. Lydia stared at the floor, her nails digging into her palms. Their lawyer coughed lightly, gathered his papers, and I could tell he understood they no longer had the upper hand. Grace and I stood side by side, a united front. For the first time since Edward's death, my heart no longer wavered. I had stepped into the battle, and I knew I had won the first round. Rebecca rose, tossing her hair, trying to recover her pride. "You think you've won today, Catherine? We'll be back." I didn't answer. I only smiled faintly, because I knew from this moment on the scales had tipped firmly to my side. The house fell into silence after the fraught confrontation. Rebecca and Lydia had gone, leaving a heavy perfume lingering in the air like the aftertaste of a storm. I closed the living room door and stood still for a long moment, my fingers trembling slightly. I knew this battle was not truly over, but at least today, Grace and I had stood together on the same side. I walked up to the second floor. The great house, its carpeted halls soft beneath my feet, was washed in honeyed light as the setting sun streamed through the windows. I felt as if someone were guiding me, as though Edward still walked beside me, whispering, "Keep going, Cat." You haven't seen it all yet. At the end of the corridor, a white-painted door was ajar. I pushed it open, and a room flooded with light revealed itself. It was a studio, spacious and airy, its four walls made almost entirely of glass. Afternoon sunlight poured in, dancing on the polished wooden floor. Easels stood in neat rows, boxes of new acrylics were arranged tidily, and brushes stood upright like sentries. The scent of linseed oil and fresh wood mingled, rich and heady, and my chest clenched. On the long table lay paintings I had long thought lost. There was a canvas I had painted as a student, hastily sold to pay the rent. There was the portrait of Edward from when we were newly in love, a painting I had assumed vanished during a move. All of them were here, quietly gathered by Edward, waiting for the day he could hand them back to me. I reached out with trembling fingers to touch a painting's surface. The faded colors were intact. The clumsy brushstrokes of a 20-year-old girl came alive as if they were painted yesterday. I could not hold back my tears. They fell onto the brush in my hand, soaking into the wood, warm. Edward had not only left me a plot of land to keep, but also a house to live in. He had restored the dream I had buried, the dream of painting, of living through color and form, not only through duty and sacrifice. Outside the window, I heard the pounding of hooves. When I looked up, I saw Grace riding the chestnut horse, her hair flying in the wind, laughing aloud. The sunset spread a brilliant orange over the meadow, and my daughter stood there like a vivid patch of color in a destined painting. I set a fresh canvas on the easel, picked up a brush, and felt an odd thrill. How many years had it been since I last painted? Yet now, every emotion rushed in. I sketched the first lines. Grace on the saddle, sunlight haloing her, the vast meadow behind. I painted with tears and smiles, as if Edward were standing behind me, his hand on my shoulder, whispering encouragement. As darkness gathered, I returned to the desk and opened the laptop. Edward's final video appeared. He sat in this very studio, his smile gentle, his eyes full of faith. "Kat," his voice rang warm and deep, "I knew you would come here. I knew you would pick up the brush again and find yourself. This is the last gift I want to leave. Not just the land, not just the house, but your dream. I want you to live, to paint, and to love. Until tomorrow, my love." The screen faded. I reached out and touched it lightly, wanting to hold on to the warmth of that image. Tears flowed again, but this time they were not heavy. They were tears of rebirth. I whispered, my voice trembling but sure, "Yes, tomorrow, and all the days after. I will live, and I will keep everything you left me." Outside, Grace's horse hooves echoed, mingling with the wind through the maples. I looked at the unfinished painting on the easel, and for the first time in months, I saw the future opening up, full of color, painful but glorious, just like the love Edward had left me.